My wife spent our rent money on designer bags. Again, so I packed quietly, left, and let her discover the eviction alone. I'm a 32-year-old guy, married for 6 years, and I've always tried to be the responsible one. I work long hours, trying to keep everything together: bills, rent, groceries, all the little things that make a life feel stable. On the surface, everything seems normal. People see a happy couple, maybe even envy how well we appear to balance life. But behind closed doors, it's a constant struggle. Money has always been a point of tension. My wife loves designer items, bags, shoes, the whole collection, and I've tried to support her passions within reason. But every month there's the gnawing fear. Did she spend more than we can afford? I've learned to tread lightly, picking my battles because arguing rarely works. It's like walking on eggshells, hoping I'm not about to step into another mess. Some nights, I lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the next month's bills and wondering how we'll survive. I've tried explaining, pleading even, but she has this way of brushing it off, making it seem like I'm the unreasonable one. That feeling of helplessness builds quietly inside, like a storm gathering on the horizon. This month, though, something felt off from the start. The usual tension in the apartment seemed heavier, the air thicker. She smiled like everything was normal, but I caught the way her fingers lingered over her credit card bills, the way she paused before answering a call from the store. My gut tightened, an instinct I've learned to trust after 6 years of repeated betrayals. I had no idea that what awaited me that day would break the routine, shatter the fragile calm, and force me to make a choice I never thought I would. And when I saw the account balance, my heart sank deeper than I expected. I could hardly breathe, and the words I wanted to shout caught in my throat because I knew. This wasn't the first time. The question that haunted me as I stood there was simple. How could she do this again? And as I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, I realized I was already thinking about something no one would expect next. I walked over to the laptop on the kitchen counter, hands trembling, heart pounding. Opening our online banking, the numbers hit me like a punch to the stomach. The rent money, every last cent, was gone, spent, on a new collection of designer bags. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, and I felt the familiar mix of anger and disbelief rising in my throat. Seriously? I muttered under my breath, my voice barely audible. She was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, humming like nothing was wrong. "Did you use the rent money again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm but failing miserably. She looked up, eyes widening for a split second, then quickly softened into that practiced, innocent expression. "Oh, that? Don't worry, I'll make it up," she said, waving it off like it was nothing. Her casual tone made my blood boil. "Make it up? You spent our rent money. Do you even hear yourself?" I could feel my voice cracking, but she just shrugged, tapping the bags on her screen, and smiled. The audacity made me pause. How could someone be so utterly unaware of the weight of their actions? I tried reasoning. Bills, groceries, our obligations. I laid it out calmly, step by step, but her eyes glazed over. She wasn't listening. She never really does. I felt a mix of exhaustion and dread, knowing this pattern too well. Each month, the same story, the same betrayal, the same gaslighting, and in that moment, staring at her, I realized I couldn't just scold or argue my way out. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, responsibility, and trust, and she had shredded all three without a second thought. My fists clenched, jaw tight. Something inside me shifted, a quiet, cold decision forming. I didn't yell, I didn't storm out. I just stepped back, took a deep breath, and thought, maybe the next move wouldn't be about arguing at all. Maybe the lesson needed to be learned differently, and that thought made my stomach twist because it was terrifying and liberating. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my head in my hands, replaying the past 6 years like a broken record. This wasn't new. There had been months where groceries got paid late because she needed the latest bag release. Times when bills piled up because her online orders took precedence over our obligations. I've tried so many times. Calm conversations, structured budgets, even counseling, But it never sticks. Every promise to change ends the same way. Another splurge, another lie, another late night of anxiety and panic. I remember one night, staring at an eviction notice we miraculously avoided, feeling my stomach twist as she laughed about a $2,000 bag. I told her, voice tight with frustration, "Do you even care what happens if we can't pay rent next month?" She shrugged, smiling like it was all a joke. The audacity stung worse than any insult. She never acknowledged the fear, the stress, the countless sleepless nights I endured trying to cover the gaps she left behind. It wasn't just money. It was the emotional manipulation, the guilt-tripping, the casual gaslighting that made me question my own sanity. "I just wanted to feel good," she'd say, as if my panic over lost security and stability didn't matter. Every month the pattern repeated, and every time I told myself I'd had enough, only to find myself trapped in it again. I glanced around our apartment, the neatness, the expensive things, the comfortable furniture, all purchased while we teetered on the edge. It looked perfect to anyone visiting, but I knew the cracks beneath the surface, the chaos hidden behind curated perfection. My anger mixed with exhaustion. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but I stayed silent, and that's when it hit me. Reasoning with her wasn't going to work. No matter how calm or patient I was, the cycle would continue. If I wanted change, I had to take it into my own hands. And as I realized that, a cold, determined thought crept into my mind, one that scared me almost as much as it excited me. I could feel my patience snapping, thread by thread, until I finally stood in front of her, fists clenched but voice steady. "We need to talk. Now." Her eyes flicked up from her phone, a faint annoyance as if I were interrupting her fun. "About what?" she asked, though I already knew she'd guess. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm, to make this count. "It's about the money." Again. "You spent our rent money on another bag," I said, letting the words hang in the air. Her face went blank for a second, then she smiled. That practiced charm I hated so much. "I'll fix it," she said, waving it off. "I always do." I shook my head, frustration burning hotter than ever. "No, this isn't about fixing it anymore. You promised. Month after month and nothing changes. This is the last time I'm letting it slide." Her tone shifted, just slightly, defensive now. "You're overreacting." "It's not that big of a deal." My stomach twisted. "Not that big of a deal. You just risked us being evicted again. Do you even hear yourself?" My voice rose, shaking with anger I could barely control. I could see it in her eyes, the first flicker of panic, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. I laid out the rules, clear and unyielding. Budgets would be followed, bills paid first. Any further spending over our limit would have consequences. I watched her nod, her mouth forming the right words, but I could tell she wasn't listening. I've seen this dance too many times. And then, barely 24 hours later, my phone buzzed with notifications I couldn't ignore. Another bag purchased online. My chest tightened, rage mixing with helplessness. That's when the thought hit me, raw and unstoppable. Maybe talking, pleading, or threatening wouldn't work. Maybe it was time for a move she wouldn't see coming. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dim glow of my laptop, the weight of our situation pressing down like a brick. I knew arguing wasn't going to work. Threats, ultimatums, pleading, it all fell on deaf ears. The same pattern, the same betrayal, the same cycle repeating itself. I felt trapped in a house that looked like a home but felt more like a gilded cage. I began quietly making a plan. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a shouting match. I would leave, but I would do it carefully, silently, with everything I needed to survive on my own. I made a list in my head, clothes, documents, money I'd saved secretly over the months, sentimental items I couldn't part with. Each item added to the weight of the decision I was about to make. Packing in silence, I moved like a ghost, careful not to wake her. The thought of her waking to an empty bed, an empty apartment, hit me with a strange mixture of fear and satisfaction. This wasn't revenge for the sake of cruelty. It was a lesson, a reality check. A final way to force her to face the consequences of her choices. The apartment smelled faintly of her perfume and the lingering aroma of dinner I hadn't eaten. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, even her soft breathing in the living room. I couldn't tell if I was more anxious about leaving or more relieved at the thought of finally being free from the constant betrayals. And as I zipped the last bag and slipped it by the door, I realized that nothing would prepare me for the shock on her face when she realized what I had done. I paused for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, and let the silence settle. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be easy. But I knew one thing for certain. She would finally discover the consequences of her actions, alone. I thought I knew everything about her spending habits, every credit card, every account, every shopping app. But as I sat quietly in the corner of our bedroom, finalizing my bags for the exit, I noticed something strange on her laptop. A browser window she'd left open, masked under innocent tabs. Curiosity and a creeping dread made me click. What I saw froze me in place. A hidden credit card account she'd been using for months, entirely separate from what I thought were our finances. My mind raced. All those times I'd forgiven her, all the promises she'd made, all the money I'd quietly covered. It had been far worse than I imagined. The sums were staggering. Rent, money, utilities, groceries. Everything had been siphoned off into her secret spending. My blood ran cold, my stomach twisted, and for a moment I just sat there, shaking. I'd always felt manipulated. But now I understood the depth of the deception. I wanted to confront her, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I caught myself. No, this wasn't about confrontation anymore. I needed control. I needed the upper hand. I closed the laptop and stepped back, letting the realization sink in. I wasn't just leaving. I had evidence of just how deceitful she had been all along. The apartment felt smaller, suffocating somehow, the soft hum of the fridge now sounding like a warning. I ran my fingers through my hair, thinking of all the nights I'd stayed awake, covering her overspending quietly, feeling like a failure for not being able to stop her. Now the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about rent anymore. It was a betrayal layered on top of years of trust broken. And in that moment, a plan solidified in my mind. If she thought she'd get away with this, she was wrong. I would leave, yes, but this time, she would discover everything in a way she never expected. And as I zipped my last bag, heart racing, I realized what she didn't know yet would hit harder than anything I had felt before. I waited until the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional click of her phone filled the apartment. Signs that she was distracted, completely unaware of what I was about to do. My bags were packed, documents tucked safely inside, and my phone set to silent. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. I paused at the bedroom door, heart hammering, listening to her laughter echo faintly from the living room, and a strange mix of fear and relief washed over me. I grabbed the first bag and moved silently through the apartment, careful not to disturb the scattered designer items that had cost us more than I cared to calculate. Each bag I carried felt heavier, not because of its weight but because of what it represented. The years of compromises, betrayals, and sleepless nights. I paused at the front door, taking a deep breath, knowing that once I stepped outside, there would be no turning back. The cool night air hit me as I stepped onto the street. Everything felt sharper, the distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, even the faint smell of her perfume lingering in my clothes. I glanced back at the apartment one last time. She had no idea. I could already imagine the panic on her face when she realized the bed was empty, the apartment half empty, and the rent unpaid. I pulled out my phone, typed a quick note, not a letter, not a confrontation, just a few words outlining what she'd done and the consequences she now had to face. I left it on the kitchen counter, neatly folded, so she couldn't miss it. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. As I walked away into the night, the adrenaline mixed with relief and fear, I felt a clarity I hadn't known in years. This was my life, my choice, my way of reclaiming control. And as I disappeared around the corner, I knew one thing for certain. She would be forced to confront the chaos she'd created. Alone. I wandered the streets for what felt like hours, the night air doing little to cool the turmoil inside me. Relief and adrenaline were quickly replaced by a hollow ache, a sinking realization of what I had just done. My apartment, our life, was behind me, and the person I loved or thought I loved was about to face the consequences of years of deceit. I had taken the step I'd dreamed of for months, but instead of feeling triumphant, I felt empty. Memories flooded in. The first time I had trusted her with money and she blew it on a single purchase. The nights I stayed awake, worrying we'd be evicted, silently covering for her mistakes. The fights that ended with forced apologies, the tears I swallowed, the guilt I carried for not being enough. I was supposed to be the provider, the partner, the stable one, but did leaving really make me that, or did it make me just another version of the failure I had feared becoming? I found myself on a park bench, head in my hands, staring at the empty streets. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of loneliness. Every laugh, every "I love you," every promise felt tainted now. My chest tightened with the guilt of abandoning someone I had once thought was my partner, even if she had betrayed me repeatedly. I thought about turning back, apologizing, explaining, but I knew she wouldn't understand. She never had. The emptiness threatened to swallow me whole, and for a moment I questioned if I'd made the right choice at all. My mind swirled with doubt, fear, and grief, a tangled storm I didn't know how to weather. And yet, even in that hollow, shattered moment, a quiet thought kept whispering. Maybe this was the only way to finally regain myself. Maybe, finally, this pain would lead to freedom. But I had no idea just how intense the storm she was about to face would be. The next morning, I stayed out of sight, letting the city wake around me while she discovered the chaos I had left behind. I could only imagine her panic. The first glance at the empty bedroom, the half-packed apartment, the note I had left on the counter. Every thought of her rising dread twisted my stomach. I didn't gloat, at least not out loud, but a quiet satisfaction ran alongside the worry. She had spent years ignoring the consequences of her choices. Now she would face them alone. I pictured her racing through the apartment, flipping open drawers, rifling through closets, her eyes widening as she realized that the rent wasn't paid. The bags weren't just overspending, they were the reason. Bills piled on the counter, unopened, the eviction notice glaring like a beacon. I imagined her frantic calls to me, texts I wouldn't answer, her voice caught between confusion, anger, and desperation. The irony was almost too sharp. Every warning, every argument, every "this needs to change" had been ignored. And now, the full weight of her actions crashed down like a wave she couldn't swim against. I could hear her footsteps pacing in my mind, the shuffle of papers, the muttered curses and pleas to undo something she couldn't. Even from a distance, I felt the intensity of her panic. The designer bags she had prized so highly were meaningless now. They couldn't pay the bills or reverse the years of reckless spending. And yet, even in imagining her shock, I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about reality, about finally letting her understand what her choices had done. And as I leaned against a lamppost across the street, heart racing, I realized she was about to learn the lesson that no words, no pleas, no ultimatums had ever made her see, and she wouldn't forget it anytime soon. Hours later, I finally let her reach me. My phone buzzed constantly, missed calls, frantic texts, but I ignored them until I felt ready to speak. When I finally answered, her voice was tight, shaky, laced with panic and disbelief. "Where are you? Why did you leave? What is happening?" she demanded, words tumbling over each other. I could hear the desperation, the fear that had replaced her usual arrogance. I stayed calm, measured, letting each word sink in. "I left because I couldn't keep covering for your choices anymore. The rent isn't paid. You've been hiding money and lying to me for months." My tone wasn't accusatory. It was firm, resolute. I could almost hear her falter, trying to find a way to manipulate the conversation like she always had. But I wasn't going to engage. Not this time. She tried every tactic, pleading, gaslighting, blaming, even a few tears. But I held my ground, repeating calmly what had happened, what she had done, and what the consequences were. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't begging. I was finally being clear, firm, and truthful. The panic in her voice grew, frustration rising as she realized there was no escape, no excuses, no magic fix. For the first time, she faced the results of her actions entirely on her own. No scapegoat, no silent provider cleaning up her mess. Just reality. I could feel my own chest loosen, a tension I hadn't realized I was carrying for years finally easing, and yet, even as I spoke, I knew this wasn't over. She could still try to fight back, manipulate, or twist the story. But I had shifted the power, and as her voice cracked in disbelief and panic, I realized the truth I had always known. Actions have consequences, and now she would finally live with hers, alone. In the quiet that followed, I finally felt it. The calm after a storm I had weathered for years. I walked through the streets, letting the night air clear my mind, replaying everything that had led to this moment. It wasn't just about money or designer bags. It was about respect, boundaries, and the repeated betrayal that had eroded trust over time. I realized I had been complicit in my own stress, hoping she'd change, pleading for her to see reason, and forgiving too easily. I thought about the nights I had sacrificed sleep, the days I had swallowed my anger, the times I had quietly covered for her mistakes. All of it had been exhausting, demoralizing, and invisible. But leaving quietly, letting her face reality on her own, wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. It was the first real act of self-respect I had allowed myself in years. As I reflected, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. Not in the frantic, helpless way I had been. Instead, there was a sense of empowerment, a quiet acknowledgement that I had taken control of my life. I had set boundaries, enforced them, and finally reclaimed the agency I had lost in the chaos of repeated betrayals. I also understood that freedom came with its own loneliness. There was a bitter edge, a reminder of what had been lost. But the clarity, the sense of self, and the knowledge that I had acted with integrity gave me a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible. I could finally start rebuilding, focusing on what mattered: my stability, my sanity, and my future. And as I took a deep breath, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, I realized that this night wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning I had chosen for myself, free from lies, manipulation, and betrayal. But I knew, somewhere in that apartment she was left to navigate alone, she would feel the full weight of her choices. Just when I thought the storm had passed, my phone buzzed one last time. A message from her, short and sharp. "You think you've won. This isn't over." I read it slowly, a faint smile tugging at my lips. For years, I had feared her manipulations, her gaslighting, her endless cycles of guilt and drama. But now, after leaving, after letting reality hit, I realized I held the power. She had tried to control me, hide money, and make me feel responsible for her choices, but I had broken free. And yet, in that text, I felt a strange mix of pity and satisfaction. She didn't understand that this wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Every frantic call she made, every frantic plan she cooked up to regain control, would crash into the reality she had ignored for years. The eviction, the unpaid bills, the consequences of her secret spending, these were hers alone to face. Later, I learned through mutual contacts that she had attempted to scramble together money to cover the rent. But it was too late. Landlords were firm, bills were overdue, and the tangled mess of her secret finances unraveled faster than she could manage. All the lies, all the excuses, all the manipulations finally laid bare. And while I stayed removed from the chaos, I felt a quiet vindication, not in cruelty, but in the truth finally catching up. Walking through the city that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. There was freedom in silence, in letting her discover reality without interference, in reclaiming my life without further confrontation. I realized that sometimes the most powerful lesson isn't in yelling or punishing. It's in stepping away, letting the consequences speak, and trusting that truth will find its way. And as the lights of the city reflected in puddles from a recent rain, I knew one thing. I had finally broken the cycle. She would face her reckoning alone, and I would move forward, unshaken, empowered and free, finally in control of my own life.